So now we've moved on to some of the more challenging problems for words and context type skills. So take a moment, read through the problem yourself, look through the answers, and come up with what you think should be the correct response. And then we'll come back and we'll go through it together. Now that you've had a chance to look through it yourself, let's go through this problem together. So some of the key things that stick out to me in this prompt, it says that Charles S. Johnson fostered his contributors diverse perspectives. So it says that Charles S. Johnson fostered his contributors diverse perspectives here and promoted their authorial autonomy. And that this actually diverged from other stances such as W.E. Du Bois and Alan Locke, whose decisions on their publications were more what? So what this tells me is we need to find that W.E. Du Bois and Alan Locke are doing the opposite of what Charles S. Johnson did. So because Charles S. Johnson is fostering his contributors' diverse perspectives, and promoting their authorial autonomy, W.E. Du Bois were the opposite there, which is going to be B, dogmatic. So what does that mean? Dogmatic means that they believe that their views are the dominant view, that is superior than others. So they felt that they don't need to promote diverse perspectives of other authors. They prioritize their own unified vision. It's not that they're not proficient, because it's not saying anything here about skill. It's not ambiguous. Ambiguous meaning unclear. Again, based on the context, is talking about how they promote their own views over others. And unpretentious. So again, we don't have any details to say that they aren't being snobby or trying to impress others with their greater skill. Maybe that's the case, but we don't know from the prompt here, so we can eliminate that answer. So that leaves us with B as the correct answer. Okay, let's take a look at this next problem. So just like the last one, take a moment, go through the problem yourself, pause the video, and let's come back and let's work on this one together. Now that you've had a chance to work on this your own, let's see how we get to the correct answer here. So they're talking about nuisance costs, and they give the definition that these are the costs that take the time of the time and effort people must spend to make donations, and that reduces charitable giving. So they can mitigate this by compensating donors for those nuisance costs, but these variables are very variable and largely blank of donation size. So the logic here is then that they would want to compensate donors by attracting large donors over many small ones. So if charities are reimbursing donors' nuisance costs, they'd rather attract a few large donors than many small donors, because that reimbursing cost doesn't change based on donation size. And this means that these time and effort costs are independent of the donation amount. Supplemental to and predictive of doesn't quite fit the logic of the text, and subsumed in isn't supported by the passage. And that would mean that this is a part of the donation. So the key takeaway here is that charities will handle the same cost, whether you're giving $5 or $5,000, making those costs independent of donation size. So take a moment now, let's look at this next problem. Pause the video, come up with the answer that you think best fits describing the word contracted. Okay, now that you've had a moment to do that, let's go through this one together. So contracted doesn't mean in this sense limited or restricted. It's used the way we would talk about as catching an illness. He picked up or developed, C, a rambling habit of mind. Described and settled don't fit, because it doesn't suggest in the text that he wrote about his habit or that he calmed it down. Instead, it indicates this mindset took hold of him the way that you'd contract a virus. Hence, developed is the best answer here. Okay, now let's move on to the next problem here. Take a moment, pause the video, and tell me what you think the answer should be. Okay, now that you've had a chance to look at this yourselves, let's go through the problem together. So they believe the first thing they tell you is that many cities influence each other, but this direct evidence is difficult to find. However, they found recent excavations in Guatemala that unearthed the citadel that shows blank Teotihuacan architecture, including a near replica of a famed Teotihuacan temple, providing tangible evidence of outside influence. So we need to know that what is that blank going to say there? So this shows shows something of what of that architecture. So when we go through together, it's saying the passage says that Tikal structures share important traits with Teotihuacan, like a near copy of a Teotihuacan temple. Refinements would mean that Tikal improved on this design, which isn't stated. Precursors of would imply that Tikal came first, but that contradicts the evidence here. And animosities towards would make no sense when the Tikal's architecture is essentially imitating that of Teotihuacan. So this leaves us with commonalities with as the correct answer, sharing that they are capturing that similarity and that direct influence. Okay, let's look at this next problem now. So, as usual, take a look at the problem yourself, pause the video, and come up with the answer first, and then we'll go through this one together. So, the question states that the girl with the flute was once thought to be Vermeer, might actually be one of his students, indicating that Vermeer may not have worked alone. So the question becomes, which word means this finding could invalidate our idea of Vermeer as a solitary artist? So the answer here is going to be A, negating. If evidence suggests that Vermeer taught students who paint in style, that's going to negate or reverse our picture of him as that completely solitary artist. The painting's subtle differences challenge this assumption that he always worked alone. Prefiguring, entrenching, or substantiating, this would strengthen or predict an existing view, but the text suggests a contradiction. Therefore, negating is the precise choice. Okay, let's look at this next problem. Pause the video, tell me what you think the answer should be here. So the context of this problem is that most animals can't pass on somatic mutations, meaning these are genetic alterations in their non-reproductive cells. Elkhorn coral, however, can, and that is unusual. So the key word here is which word would mean that this is a deviation from the norm. So the correct answer is going to be C, an anomaly. An anomaly is something that doesn't follow the usual rule. Here, the rule is that somatic mutations typically aren't inherited. Elkhorn coral breaks this rule, making it an anomaly. It's not simply a new hypothesis, it's not a new idea, nor is it an affinity or an attraction towards something, or a corroboration for standard genetics. Rather, it's the exception that proves genetics can work differently in corals. Let's keep moving forward and look at the next problem. So pause the video, figure out the answer, and tell me what you think it should be. Alright, now that we're back, let's look at the problem together here. So the key context here is that some models are predicting that bees will travel less distance if flowers are abundant nearby. So what they're saying here is when foraging will decline as floral density increases, but they show that this bee's behavior is inconsistent with this prediction if flowers in dense patches are blank. So what we need to do is find a word that indicates a patch of flowers is of low species richness. Right, shown there. So which choice best shows this? The correct answer is going to be B, homogeneous, which means that if flowers in a patch are all of the same kind, bees can't get a variety of resources in that one spot. So homogeneous means all the same. So they'll ignore that model's travel less prediction and keep foraging elsewhere. Depleted, immature, and dispersed don't capture that idea of the patch's problem is the lack of species diversity. Hence, homogeneous is the correct term here. Moving on to the next problem here. Take a moment, pause the video, figure out which one you think the correct answer is. Okay, so the context of this problem is researchers are wondering if people's false memories, like a logo's mistaken detail, are caused by previously seeing incorrect versions. So what we need to figure out here, to fill in the blank, is which word conveys having contact with these mistaken images. So the correct answer for this one is going to be B, exposure to. The question is asking, do shared false memories come from exposure to incorrect images in ads or online? Compliance with, criteria for, and forfeiture of don't suit this idea of encountering or being familiar with something. Exposure to perfectly fits a hypothesis that repeated viewing of an incorrect logo might cause people to remember it that way. Compliance with means to obey something. Criteria is a set of rules that you would need to follow or to be valid for. And forfeiture means to give up, none of which means fulfills the logic or the context of this problem. For this last problem, let's look at it together and tell me what you think the correct answer should be. Alright, so the context of this problem is that archaeologists discovered prehistoric women hunted far more than previously believed, up to half the hunters in some populations. So the question becomes, which word highlights that the once accepted but now challenged idea that women's hunting was too small to matter? So the correct answer here would be C, negligible. The old assumption was that women barely hunted. In other words, their contribution was negligible. The study, however, found a much bigger female role, contrary to the low participation view. That's why negligible, meaning so small it's almost unnoticed, is the belief that they're challenging. Not inevitable, meaning it's going to happen no matter what. Satisfactory, meaning that it is acceptable. Or commonplace, which would be the direct opposite, such that it is regularly occurring. So C is the correct answer here.